all kinds of rules about what percentage of you get. If you're retired from the military, up to a certain level, your VA pension replaces some part of your military retirement pay. Those laws are always changing. They're going to become more liberal. I think eventually we'll be at a place where, if you're a retired military, you'll be able to keep your retired pay and get your service-connected disability pay, and they won't offset each other. The benefit of getting, under the current offset rules, the benefit of getting a service-connected disability pay instead of, in lieu of, retired pay is that the service-connected disability pay is not taxable. So you get a little more. You get a little more payback. But again, every person's case is different. And I'm going to say this for you guys here and for the folks at home. If you think you need help with any of your VA benefits, any benefits, or anything I talk about today, I need you to call me and make an appointment. And I can either meet you over here, or we can meet in Belfair if you're able to get to Belfair. You know, it's 20 minutes away, 25 minutes away. We'll figure out how to connect. And that's the best way to do this, especially during COVID. I don't just hang out in the office always. I like to make appointments so I know there, and I give us a full hour so we can really go into things in detail. But that's how we get this done. And then most of all, especially for folks at home we might have some folks who are survivors of veterans, widows, or widowers of veterans who passed away. And I often help folks with survivor benefits. I'm still helping the widows of World War II veterans with their survivor benefits. Yeah, believe it or not. I mean, I've got World War II veterans who've just died who are in their mid-90s, and their wives are in their mid to late 80s. And we're still helping them. We're still serving them. 2 years ago, I had a World War II vet come in and file his first ever VA claim. I mean, talk about procrastination, but you know, he's now deceased, and a month ago, I was helping his wife with her survivor benefits. And I think we just about got that figured out. There were some complications because of previous marriages and some other stuff we're working through. But one week, again, a few weeks ago, that's all I did that week. I helped 4 different surviving spouses with their spouses' benefits. So, without going into all the details, because it's all complicated and it's all on the VA website, which is va.gov. va.gov, real simple website. There are burial benefits. There are burial. There's free burial at Tahoma National Cemetery and at the state retirement, state veteran cemeteries. There's one in Spokane. There's one here at Retzel. There's benefits for surviving dependents. If you have a dependent child who's disabled, even if they're an adult, but if they're disabled, verifiably disabled, there's some benefits for them. There's benefits if you need in-home care, if you are a combat disabled veteran. Not for any disabled vet, but for combat disabled veterans, there's even assistance if to have somebody come into your home. Eric talking about how you're trying to help people stay in their homes. This is an alternative to moving somebody into a VA hospital or a VA retirement center. Yeah, I mean there's it's called aid and something assistance. I'm not a subject matter expert on that, but those are probably the 3 biggest things I work on: are service-connected disabilities, survivor benefits, and burial benefits. Those are the routine things that I always deal with almost every week. Okay. Some veterans, especially those who are struggling with finances and so on, I can get them signed up for VA health care. Even homeless veterans with an other than honorable discharge can get emergency or basic health care through the VA.
Would you go over that again, please, one more time?
Homeless veterans or veterans who are very low income, even if they have an other than honorable discharge. Because in many cases, like if you have what they call bad paper, right? A bad conduct discharge, a dishonorable discharge, a general discharge under dishonorable conditions, all of those conditions, your VA benefits are very severely limited. But there is health care for vets. Let me tell you, this would be for not primarily for older veterans, but for younger veterans who are just coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Those veterans, maybe they had a good first enlistment, their first 2 or 3 years in the military, and they got an honorable discharge, and then maybe they re-enlisted, and they got into trouble in their second enlistment. The military, especially the Army now, I think the Marines too, are being much more forgiving, lenient, on making sure those guys get full benefits. They'll give them full credit, in many cases, for VA benefits, even if they're in their second enlistment or third enlistment, they had an other than honorable discharge. They'll still give them full VA benefits, because we realize, and we're getting into the second part of my presentation here in a minute, bad stuff happens to us. Psychologically, spiritually, physically, and you change when you've been in combat. And their military service led to their other than honorable behavior that led to their bad paper, their bad discharge. So we're being much more forgiving and more lenient. Not like back in the Vietnam days when maybe you got caught smoking marijuana in 1968 in Vietnam and you got a dishonorable discharge and got kicked out. That's not happening as much now. We're being much more forgiving because we understand that veterans are a little broken and they're self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and they get into trouble. And my sense, and I was on the Army personnel staff for 3 years at the Pentagon, we are much more empathetic, if I can use that word. Okay? So, doesn't help.
Would you say compassion takes the cake there?
Compassion, empathy, just understanding. We understand better now what veterans experience when they're in combat and what we put through people through the last 20 years. And that is a really good time. Well, before I go any further into my second part of my presentation, questions about VA stuff. Anything you're curious about, always wondered about, something I haven't made clear enough? Yeah.
Once you establish your military service number and you have an identity, is that now transferred from hard records into computerized copies now? Is it all updated? Because at one time they were all in paper files.
Yeah, they're still primarily in paper files back in St. Louis.
Okay.
And right now, all the veterans who are listening, if you have a copy of your DD-214, your discharge papers from active duty, and you only get one when you're on active duty for more than 90 days, hang on to that like gold. Because right now, if you don't have your DD-214, it is like finding hen's teeth to get a DD-214 out of the Record Center, the National Archives in St. Louis. It was shut down for more than a year because of COVID, and I'm still pulling my hair out trying to get veterans their DD-214s. Because you can't access your benefits without your DD-214. DD stands for Department of Defense Form 214. And its format has changed over the years, and sometimes we can find substitutes for it. And in fact, REG, National Guard, and Army Reserve have never gotten a DD-214 because they were never on active duty. They were discharged from the reserves or the Guard. They have other paperwork that sometimes will allow people to qualify. So that's more complicated, but that DD-214 is really important. And I have a copy of mine in our safe deposit box. Every time you get released from active duty from 90 days or more, you get an updated DD-214, and you should keep that current copy, or your best copy, in a safe place where you can get to it. And, make sure your spouse knows where it is, because someday he or she might have to access it, right? To get your benefits after you're gone. All right, any other questions? VA stuff. Anything at all? Are you getting your VA benefits now?
Excuse me?
Are you getting your VA benefits now?
Some, I guess. It's kind of what I showed up for.
Are you getting a percentage now? What percent are you getting?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
You're not getting a payment every month from the VA?
Yeah, I am. It's not a full heck of a lot.
Probably 10 or 20%. We should talk. Take one of my cars, and Diane and I are on our way to Spokane this afternoon. I'll be back next week, though. Call me, and let's make an appointment to go to look at your stuff.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Let me mention, while I'm talking to a Vietnam vet, that we know that Vietnam veterans were exposed to Agent Orange, right? Chemical defoliant, super carcinogenic, and they've, over the years, two things have happened. They've expanded the number of people that are eligible to apply for Agent Orange claims, including the Brownwater Navy that you served in. Those are the veterans who served in South Vietnam, out in the Delta, out in the rivers and the deltas. They call them the Brownwater Navy, and patrol boats and other kinds of vessels, right?
Yes, I was, when I went on patrol with the Vietnamese,
Okay.
total Vietnamese crew.
You were in a Vietnamese patrol boat. You were their advisor? Yeah. We also now have claims eligible for the Blue Water Navy. Within, I think, 12 or 15 nautical miles of the coast, if you served off the coast of Vietnam, destroyer or a frigate or, whatever, a carrier, they're also now eligible. Because we know that, like on a carrier, for example, airplanes that were distributing Agent Orange, spreading Agent Orange over the jungles of Vietnam, or that had to fly through clouds of Agent Orange, when they got back to the ship, those aircraft were covered in Agent Orange. And sailors had to decontaminate them, had to wash them down. And those sailors were exposed to Agent Orange when they were washing those aircraft and servicing those aircraft back on the carrier. I should also mention that I'm a Navy dad. My son and daughter-in-law are both Navy pilots back in Norfolk, Virginia. My daughter-in-law flies Blackhawks and my son flies the E-2 Hawkeye. It's the command and control plane on 3 or 4 of them on every carrier. So, Air Force fighter pilots, they're presumptively covered now for exposure to Agent Orange if they flew in Vietnam. And there's an ever-increasing list of medical conditions that presumptively qualify for Agent Orange exposure disability. No questions. They just added hyperthyroidism to that list. Almost any cancer, prostate cancer, lung problems. There's a long list of Agent Orange stuff. If there's anybody listening in that you were in Vietnam and you were exposed to Agent Orange in any form, and you're not getting Agent Orange disability from the VA, you need to call me, okay? Because it's covered. And all we got to do is document that you were in Vietnam from this date to that date, and this is what you were doing, and it's covered, okay? And if your DD-214 was done correctly, most of the evidence we need is right there on your DD-214. Okay? Maureen?
Would that include surgical assistants and nurses in MASH units?
Yeah, if they were in country, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Medical staff, if you were in country, because they were handling, patients whose uniforms and gear had Agent Orange on them. Absolutely. Yeah, nurses, doctors, everybody. People who handled remains. Ray, you mentioned cleaning out ambulances. If you handled remains in Vietnam, well, there's one other set of issues that come with that, post-traumatic stress and other things. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, you just had to have been in the country. Some guys are getting it because they were in Thailand or in Laos or Cambodia, where Agent Orange was also used, kind of secretly. But we can now talk about that, and we can now get those things covered. So every case is different, but you got to apply.
One of my uncles actually served on a ship out in Vietnam, was, helped deal with the casualties and so on. He passed away from stomach cancer about 15 years ago. I'm just wondering if my aunt, his widow, might be, I don't just ask.
Here's the hitch.
Yeah.
You can't apply for a disability posthumously.
Yeah, okay.
Can't go back. Sad story. Well, we just made it in the nick of time. I had a spouse whose husband was dying of Agent Orange 2 months ago. And we turned in her intent to file a claim about 6 hours before he died, just before midnight on that date. But because we got the intent to file in, she has a valid claim in for covering some of his medical bills and so on, and some disability pay those last few months and year of his life. But once the veteran has passed away,
Yeah.
we can't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't go back. So that's why I say it's don't procrastinate. You know, and I tell vets when they come in, when we put down the list of things that they think might be service connected, we put everything down. Now it's kind of like throwing everything at the wall and see what sticks. The VA quite often will deny most of it, but there are appeals. There are 2 or 3 appeal processes we can go through. I've got some experience now with all of that. So you just got to be persistent and patient, and you got to find a good VA doc or a good civilian doc will document things for you, and then we submit that medical information to the VA. I want to also mention that since January 1st of 2020, so basically almost 2 years ago now, if you have VA healthcare, if you're in the VA system and have a VA Health ID card, it's called, Veterans Health ID card, you have full on-base privileges on any military base. For a commissary, for exchange, for the liquor store, the package store. In the Army we call it the Class 6 store, because liquor is in the Class 6 of supply. You can go to the gymnasium, the swimming pool, the golf course. You're eligible for all those services now if you have a VA Health ID card. You're a documented veteran. Okay? So a lot of vets don't know that.
Right.
Yeah. You just have to get your ID and register at the security gate, like at Bremerton, at the Naval Shipyard in Bremerton. And then once you're in the system, you just show your card, they scan it, and you're in. So I'm retired military, so Diane and I shop at the PX and make a commissary about once a month. And it's a great benefit. Yeah, it's a great benefit. Okay. I'm going to change gears now. A few moments ago, we were talking about how combat experience changes us, right? Physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. That has been something that Diane and I have been working on with veterans for the last several years, okay? And what we're talking about are what I call the invisible wounds of war, and this is where it might get a little difficult, okay? And if it gets hard, take a break. But the typical invisible wound that we all talk about, of course, is post-traumatic stress, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't use the D anymore. It's not a disorder. Post-traumatic stress is a natural response to the bad stuff that happens to us in life. It doesn't matter whether it's an accident, a crime, combat, domestic violence, sexual abuse. All those things cause post-traumatic stress, and that's a normal response. 12% of the general population has post-traumatic stress. 35 to 40% of veterans have post-traumatic stress from their combat time. And we finally named post-traumatic stress back in 1976 after Vietnam. And before that, we called it many other things. I'll give you guys a little history test here. Do you remember what they called it in the Civil War? They actually called it sunstroke.
Sunstroke?
Yeah. Vets who just kind of got that 1,000-yard stare and kind of checked out, and they thought it was from exposure to the sun. What do we call it in World War I? You know this one.
Shell shock?
Shell shock, exactly. What do we call it in World War II in Vietnam? In Korea?
Battle fatigue.
Yes, ma'am. You a historian? You're a good historian.
Thank you.
Yeah, battle fatigue. That's exactly what we called it. And then finally in 1976, we started calling it post-traumatic stress. Now we have some other names for it. We have post-traumatic stress, and we have what is my subject matter specialty, and that is called moral injury. Moral injury is the spiritual trauma of war. This is the part that's sensitive. I should tell you that in addition to being in the military and public service and transit, about 14 years ago now, I was ordained as a permanent deacon in the Catholic Church. And as I was serving at the Pentagon, I was going through formation for the Archdiocese of Seattle, back in Seattle, to become a deacon, one rank below a priest. 3 years of high school and the first year of college, I was studying to be a priest, but celibacy was not my calling. All right? I got out, a couple years later, got married to somebody. We were married for 37 years. Diane and I met after a divorce. 6 years ago, I met Diane about 5 years ago, and that's all good. But at the time I was at the Pentagon, I was preparing to become a deacon. I'm studying things like moral theology. Now, at the same time, I'm working in the section at the Pentagon that tracks every single soldier's death and funeral right up to the day of burial for the entire Army worldwide. We brief that information twice a day, 7 days a week, to the Chief of Staff of the Army, the 4-star general who runs the entire Army. To him and his staff, we brief that 14 times a week. And we briefed it down to a gnat's eyelash for those funerals that were coming up the next day. Where those soldiers died, how they died, who they are, who their family is, where the service is going to be held, where they're going to be buried, and finally, what general is going to go to their funeral. Since 9/11, the Army has sent a general officer, sometimes Guard, Reserve, retired, active duty, doesn't matter. They've sent a general officer to every soldier's funeral, unless the family asks the Army not to be there, and that happens rarely. But I was working in a section that was tracking that, and we started to see in 2005, 2006, this increase in accidental gunshot wounds. That's what we call them, especially when we were briefing the families. Guys, they were not accidental. They were warriors taking their own lives. And they were deployed in theater. They were overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we're trying to figure out what's going on here. Well, at the same time, I'm studying moral theology, and I came across a Methodist theologian of all things. Remember, I'm Catholic, but I was looking at a Methodist theologian named Walter Wink. And he talks about the myth of redemptive violence. The myth of redemptive violence. And this is he uses a very simple example involving Popeye. We all know Popeye, right? Popeye and olive oil and Bluto and the can of spinach that pops out, and every week Popeye is the hero. He gets the crap beat out of him. Then he eats the spinach, and he beats the crap out of Bluto, saves his girlfriend, his sweetie, and comes back the next week fit to fight, right? Ready to go again. Walter Wink points out that Bluto and Popeye never sit down and talk about their differences, and Bluto never figures out how to respect olive oil's humanity, right? And Popeye never figures out that he should just eat the spinach before the first fight with Bluto, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a comedy. It was a cartoon. But those of us who saw that week after week, and we only watched cartoons on Saturdays in those days. Remember Saturday morning? And then later on in life, in shows like Combat and in video games today, these kids are being inculcated with these warriors who just, shoot and kill and fight and die and then pop back up and keep fighting. That's the myth of redemptive violence. That even if you suffer this horrific trauma and violence, it doesn't affect you. In fact, you're a hero, right? But that is not the reality. That is not the reality. Even when it is absolutely justified, perfectly justified, like a police officer who has to take a perpetrator's life, when they have to pull that trigger and take a human life, it takes part of your soul. It takes a little bit of your humanity. That's the myth of redemptive violence. That's a moral injury. Okay? And the VA now, including the chaplains and the psychologists, are just starting to recognize this other thing beyond post-traumatic stress called moral injury. Right? And that's my personal subject matter specialty. Because of my time as a deacon, because of my time at the Pentagon, put me in a weird place where, God's grace, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, helped me figure out what's going on here. And Diane and I teach class, called a 12-week class called Reboot Combat Recovery. We start with a little meal, and we have about an hour of a program, and we go over 12 weeks, and we give a chance for warriors to share their story and to heal, to understand that God forgives them, we forgive them, and they need to help. They need to learn how to forgive themselves. That's the hard part. And so many times I've been on, before I left the diaconate as an active deacon, I was the deacon assigned helping the Catholic chaplains at the VA in Seattle and American Lake. And I would take communion to veterans in the emergency room or in intensive care. They're on their deathbeds. And they would say things like, Roy, if you knew the things I've done, you would not be speaking to me. That's the moral injury. Or they say something like, God can never forgive me for the things I've done. That's the moral injury. And I would respond to them by, God has already forgiven you. The moment you were sorry for what happened, God has forgiven you. Yeah. And my goal, Diane and I, working on this with this Reboot Combat Recovery, it's a course that came out of Clarksville, Tennessee, outside Nashville, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Just Clarksville, Tennessee is just outside of Fort Campbell. A young pastor and his wife, who was a PhD occupational therapist at Fort Campbell's Hospital, they developed this course about 12, 13 years ago back in Tennessee. And it's now going worldwide. Almost every active military base, U.S. military base in the world. But we're represented here in North Mason, and maybe sometime in the future, maybe after COVID is over and we can sit down and get back to normal, whatever that looks like, we could have a course here. And I would, Diane and I'd be happy to lead that. We can talk about that later, but
Okay.
That's moral injury. Now the third thing we're talking about these days, and it's always been there, but we've never talked about it, is called MST, military sexual trauma. Okay? And it's a huge issue now because women are in every single branch of the military. Every single specialty, every ship, every combat unit. Yeah. And it's not just a women's issue either. But I personally believe there's no statistics on this because nobody really talks about it. I think officially they say like 15% of women and 2% of men have been sexually assaulted while they were in the military. I think the numbers are more like 40 or 50% for women and 10%, 15% for men. It's much more common than people talk about, But that causes another form of trauma. It's really a form of post-traumatic stress. But there's a whole other process of healing from that. You're trying to help those veterans be restored to innocence, because sometimes victims of sexual trauma blame themselves, which is, not really appropriate. It's not their fault. Diane and I have worked with many veterans, only a couple of male veterans, mostly female veterans, who are still recovering from that. Every time I meet a female veteran, we get to a point in the conversation where I ask, tell me about how you were sexually harassed in the military. Did anything ever happen to you sexually? And sometimes I'm the only person, first person that's ever asked them that. And I'm going to do a little disclosure here, just on my own personal experience. Again, I told you I was in Catholic seminary when I was high school, first year of college. When I was a college freshman, a guy attempted to sexually assault me in my dorm room at the seminary just before I left. It didn't get all the way to rape, but he went on to become one of the most abusive priests in the Archdiocese of Seattle. He was finally defrocked in 2004 after I and 12 other guys testified against the Archdiocese on behalf of 7 plaintiffs who sued the Archdiocese. I was a deacon candidate at the time. They didn't kick me out, to their credit. They just told the truth. So I have a deep empathy for folks who are victims of sexual trauma. And when I share that with a vet who's been traumatized, they'll usually talk to me, tell me their story. And the VA is getting much more compassionate, much more empathetic for victims of sexual trauma. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But we have to start talking about it. Now, here's the challenge, and this is a real challenge, because sometimes I'll be talking to a group of vets and I bring up sexual trauma, and I have both victims and perpetrators in the room. Right? And both victims and perpetrators have to be healed. Right? We're trying to restore the innocence of one and trying to help the other one be reconciled, be forgiven. Big issue. But that's some of the stuff we work on in Reboot. So, I bring this up only because this stuff is connected to VA disabilities. But now we can start talking about it. Now we can start bringing it up. When it comes to create, I'm going back down to the beginning, talking about VA compensation. Here's the key thing with VA compensation. The hard part, usually, especially the older the vet is proving service connection. Did this happen to you when you were in the military? When, where, how did it happen? Were there any witnesses, etc.? We have to get witness statements. We have to get, after you were injured, did you go to sick bay? Did you go to sick call? Did you go to the hospital? Did you get treated? If there's a record of that in your military medical record, great. But a lot of times, veterans just keep charging on. They never went to see anybody. They never reported it to anybody, especially in the case of sexual trauma. They're too embarrassed to tell somebody. And it's hard sometimes to prove service connection. So, but that's what we work with. Sometimes we have to try to track down old military buddies who were there, who they did tell when it happened, back in 1968 or 1979 or 1984. We got to rebuild all that stuff. It takes time. It takes documentation and time. But that's how we get to a good VA claim. All right. Again, I'm not a subject matter expert on all of this, but the work that I do for DAB, when I've done as much as I can in terms of the paperwork, I scan it and shoot it in an email straight to the 10th floor of the Federal Building in downtown Seattle. And there's some people who are absolute subject matter experts, many of whom used to be VA claims employees. They review it and they pass it on to the VA, usually within an hour or two. If I've messed something up and we need more information, then sometimes it takes another day or two to sort it out, but that's how the process works. And it's pretty efficient. Okay? Younger vets now get most of their communication with the VA through email. Older vets, it's mostly by snail mail, it's mostly by U.S. Postal Service. Some of the vets, I work with some of the homeless vets, I have to make sure that they open a bank account, because all the payments from the VA now come through direct deposit. They have to have a bank account, they can't just get a check in the mail anymore, that's going away. It's virtually eliminated. And that's how the system works. Okay? Let me see if I've forgotten anything here. No, not really. Questions about anything I've talked about? I didn't know if that was an hour. I haven't paid attention. I hope I haven't struck too many painful chords for anybody. I'd be willing to come back maybe for just a veterans only, we would have called it, back in the day, we would have called it what? Rap session, something. Just a chance for vets to talk. Diane knows I've been part of a group in Gig Harbor. We've now dissolved and we've moved off into some other areas, but we had a group of vets that were coming together once a month for dinner. Some nights 40 or 50 vets of all ages, from Korea and Vietnam down to the most recent vets. And these are all people who've suffered moral injury and traumatic stress and sexual trauma. And we're talking about it, telling our stories. That's how you heal. That's how you move on. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening in at home too. Now, important thing, here's my phone number. You can call me anytime. This is my cell number. Well, not after 10 o'clock and not before 7, okay? My phone number, my cell phone, it's a Seattle number, forgive me. It's 206-817-8815. 206-817-8815. And it's on a flyer, a stack of flyers that I am giving to Maureen. You can get some here at the Mustard Project whenever you want to pick up a flyer. The flyer includes a couple of books about moral injury if you want to read more about it. I've had the pleasure of meeting those authors, and they're powerful stories. Email is a good way to reach me too. rcfh55@yahoo.com. In military language, that's Romeo Charlie Foxtrot Hotel 55@yahoo.com. All right? That's how to reach me.
You know, this is really interesting. I'm in an oblate class, and the oblate class is talking about exactly the same thing, moral trauma. And
I'd love to come talk to your oblate class. Now you know my Catholic background. Ray is talking about an oblate class of Franciscan oblates. These are lay people who are part of the Franciscan order in the Catholic Church. And they serve people on the margins. They serve people in need.
It's like the deacons. I'm a deacon in the Lutheran Church, and I'm a guest there.
There you
and
go.
what I'm trying to say is our society has to come to this realization, and we have to be able to heal. And this is racism and the church, and it's in the same basic
Right.
issues. So.
Let's definitely talk, Ray. We'll talk some more, Ray, and maybe we can connect at that level and reach out to some more folks.
Really interesting.
Diane and I are just over in Allen. We're just about 25 minutes away, and we're going to live here for a long time.
Well, it's telling them stories. I mean, that's how it does get healed. You share stories with people and give them a chance to listen. Just hear everything.
The funny thing about storytelling, Eric, though, is that sometimes the stories, over time, they get more complicated.
Right, they can get traumatizing, right? If you tell a story,
And at some point you wonder if in the retelling is that more traumatic than healing.
which is where you have a bit facilitated.
And that's where I've encouraged a few vets. I think it's time to move beyond the anger and the condemnation, and let's trying to find a place where you can heal.
Yeah.
And I've done that a little bit. I'm not a psychologist. I have a bachelor's degree in counseling, but I'm not a professional counselor. But there are sometimes too when I know somebody needs professional counseling, and we have some of those people at North Mason Resources. We have a couple of PhDs and a couple other behavioral health specialists, and I know when to make a referral when it's beyond my pay grade.
Roy, could you email the contact person for Pierce County?
Yes, my apologies. I forgot to put that on here this morning before I.
Well, the reason I'm asking is we have a resource guide for the Key Peninsula. Not just us, everybody. And that would be a good addition.
If you Google just Pierce County Veterans Assistance,
Pierce County.
Veterans Assistance, it will pop up. It's very readily findable. I know Mr. Becker. I met him in Kitsap County in Bremerton, but I've not met the Pierce County person. I want to say he's over in. I'm not sure. He's over on this side of the county.
But one thing we can do too is put together, for those on Facebook anyway, we can put together a post that'll link to the reporting, and we can have some of that information.
Yes.
And we'll definitely make sure all the KSIC folks have the information. And can I say this, are you going to be joining KSIC when you have time? Is that something that?
Yeah, since I took this part-time job, my time is a little more.
So at some point down the road.
I had talked with Heather about becoming a regular volunteer over here, but I've got we just got married 18 months ago, so I've got to respect my bride and Not
we'd love to
working
have
yet.
you whenever it works.
Okay.
And then work with these two guys back there.
I appreciate that.
But I just wanted to say too, so we'll have another thank you so much. I mean, it feels like we just kind of scratched the surface, but there's a lot of stuff here. And in 2 weeks, we'll have another community forum. Actually, we're building an assisted living. That's the construction across the road here. And that'll be a Greenhouse Project, who's our program partner and our managing partner. So the people who will run the place, basically talking about how they'll do that. So anybody who wants to tune in for that, that'll be in 2 weeks from today.
I have a disabled brother who was just 11 months younger than me. He was disabled in a civilian auto accident 45 years ago. He's a candidate, I think, for
okay. You have 30 beds and 2 units of assisted living in one memory care.
He's a T6 paraplegic, paralyzed from here.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll talk.
Great. Well,
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you.